Welcome, this is Dr. Fiala. This is a brief lecture on writing a research proposal. I'll have several other little lectures about each section of the proposal. So this is a pretty short overview of what you can expect. Start off with just some basics. The first question being, why do people write research proposals? A variety of reasons depending on the context. But generally, you can break it down into three main categories. One, to get approval for a project, and this is often happens if you're writing a thesis or dissertation. You have a proposal meeting where you have written a paper, and then you give a presentation about a project that you would like to do. And before they let you do it, they have to approve it, and they'll tell you everything that's wrong with it, and you may have to fix it. Yada yada. You might also have to do it for an IRB, although usually IRBs don't want to read long papers, so they just want, are you going to do anything with people? Are you going to hurt them? So usually a very abbreviated proposal for those situations. But for theses and dissertations, the papers can be quite long. The other big reason is to get somebody to pay for your research, right? You're looking for funding. So if you're doing grant applications, those look very much like research proposals. You're basically saying, hey, here's what I want to do, here's why I think it's an important question, why I should be able to do it, and here's how I would do it if you would give me the money to go and do this. And then the third reason, which occurs primarily in academia, is people just want to refine their ideas or their methods. So they've got an idea for a study, but they maybe have limited funds, limited resources, and so they want to make sure and get it right, straight out of the box, and not mess around with having to do a study, realize you didn't quite get what you're looking for because you didn't ask the questions the right way, and have to go try to do it again. So you propose it to some colleagues maybe, and get some feedback on a better way to do it, or a better way to conceptualize what you're doing perhaps, or even you might have people challenge your hypothesis, and it may lead you to rethink what you would expect an outcome to be. Okay, so who's the audience for proposal? Well, depends on the purpose, but generally it's some group or a committee of people who are, again, making some decision or giving you feedback. And for this class, I'm the audience, and the reason to write the proposal is because it's a lot of fun, and you have to. How is it different from a research paper? A couple ways. Two primary ones. One, verb tense. In a research paper, you've conducted the study, so you're primarily writing in past tense, like throughout the method section results. Participants did this. In proposal, you haven't done it, so don't write it in past tense. And how many times I say that, people will still write in a proposal, participants completed yada yada. And no, they didn't. This is a proposal paper, not a research paper. So pay attention to your verb tense. And I'll talk more about that when we talk about the method section, because that's usually where people trip up. And the other thing, obviously, you don't have any analyzed data, which significantly changes instead of a results section, you have a data analysis section, and your discussion section is also quite different because you don't have any results to discuss. Okay, so the components of a research proposal. Similar to a paper, you have an introduction section where you're presenting two main things. One is your research question, and related to that, you're having to justify the importance of your question. So why should anybody care about the answer to some question you're posing? Why is it important? And it could be kind of very applied reasons, like, well, if we got the answer to this question, we can really help people, or people are suffering, so we need to know. Or it could be, I'm advancing the knowledge of the human condition or of science in some other way that hasn't been done before, and it's important and it's relevant. It's not, what are people's favorite colors of frisbees. So the importance of your research question, and then the other thing you're going to address in the introduction is our current body of knowledge related to that question. So what do people currently think in terms of what people would say the answer is? What do we know about that question in general? And it doesn't have to be everything we know, but it needs to be enough to give some context to your current study. Okay, and again, I'll talk more about that when I talk about the introduction. The other big piece of introduction, other than your research question, along with its importance and the current knowledge, is your hypothesis. So what do you think the answer is to that question? And the important thing here is to make sure you build a robust rationale for your hypothesis. Not just, well, I think that's how it could be. Seems right. Not good enough. You have to have reasons, based on previous research and looking at slightly similar questions, not maybe the exact same question. Because if the exact question has already been answered, why are you doing it again? But maybe, there's some therapy that you're suggesting might be effective with kids, and it's only been shown to be effective with adults. You might say, okay, well, it's been shown to be effective with adults, and the ways in which kids and adults are different shouldn't impact the difference in efficacy, because maybe it doesn't require a lot of cognitive ability or whatever, thinking about how kids and adults are different. Right? We have to provide a rationale for your hypothesis, and that's your introduction. Right? And then the method section, usually, not always, but in this class, you will have a design subsection where you briefly describe the design of your method, experimental, non-experimental, correlational, a factorial, not a factorial, but a simple experiment. You'll talk about what your variables are, and you'll give operational definitions of them. Again, more details on that later. You'll talk about the sample, so who's in the study, not who is in the study, who you want to be in the study, and if you're going to try to recruit a certain number of people according to certain categories, and the big categories I always think of are gender, ethnicity, and age. So you talk about that. What incentive are they going to get? How are you going to get these people? That kind of stuff goes in the sample subsection. Materials, which could be experimental materials, like if you're showing people pictures, you would describe those. If you're having people, solve puzzles, you would describe those. But it's also, what goes here are your measures. So sometimes it's called, if you don't have any manipulative materials, it's just called the measures section. Materials is fine too, where you describe the questionnaires and the surveys or the tests that you're having people complete, and talk about the psychometric properties and how many questions there are and all that stuff. And then usually the big section of the method is the procedure. So what will people do when participants first arrive at the experiment, or when I first arrive, in the field where I will observe people, whatever, what's going to happen from beginning to end, and how long it's going to take, with enough detail that somebody can go back and do it again. Right? And for proposal, with enough detail, people say, yeah, I think you're doing the right thing, and it makes sense that you're doing that. So the other thing you want to kind of weave throughout the method section in a proposal is why you're making some decisions. Like, well, I'm going to get people this way because it'll be a representative sample of this population who I'm really interested in. Or I'm making sure to counterbalance the presentation of these stimuli to avoid a confound of order effects, which we'll talk later about what order effects are. But you want to talk about why you're making some of your decisions as well. And then instead of a results section, typically you have more of a data analysis section. Here you'll talk about what scores or data will be used, will be analyzed. So we'll evaluate people's average scores on the BDI-2 or whatever it is. And then what tests you're going to use for analysis. Analysis of variance will be used to blah, blah, blah. A Pearson correlation coefficient will be calculated to determine the relationship between blah, blah, blah. Whatever it is, you say what test you would use and what you're going to use it for. Not just, and ANOVA will be used to analyze the results. No, that's too vague. ANOVA will be used to what? Examine differences between this and this, right? And the other thing that people sometimes forget to put is the expected pattern of results. So Pearson correlation coefficient will be calculated to determine the relationship between A and B. It is expected that this will be a positive, moderately sized correlation, right? So what do you think, which goes back to your hypothesis, but stating it in terms of scores on the tests that you're talking about. That's what the results section, the data analysis section is all about. The discussion section then has some overlap. You can restate the expected outcome, which is your hypothesis, right? But not in terms of scores. So in the data analysis section, you may say it's expected that individuals who score, who receive higher scores on the BDI-2 depression inventory, will report having missed more days of work during the 2-month period of observation. Right? So you're saying at a very kind of numbers level what you're expecting. The discussion, you'll say, it's expected that people who report being more depressed miss more days of work. So you'll talk more at the concept level and less at the number level in the discussion section. Once you do that, it doesn't take long, you address what would limit the conclusions that could be drawn. So if I went out and conducted the study and I got some results back, I'm gonna draw some conclusions, right? And either the results will be consistent with my expectations, my hypothesis is supported. So if that were true, so if I'm looking at kind of an experiment, I say, okay, there is an effect of A on B. I could be wrong because blah blah. It has to do with how you collect the data, who you got in your sample, how you measure the variables, whatever. You got to identify those things that would impact your internal validity, maybe. Or you can also think about external validity. So I said there's an effect, but my sample was only left-handed cello players, so it may not generalize to other people, right? So you address that. But you also can here write about if you don't find what you think you're going to find. So I may find that there's no effect, but that could happen because why? Maybe the study was insufficiently powered because you didn't have enough people in the sample, or whatever. That's what you have to think about. That's where your own creativity and thinking comes in. And after you address these potential limitations, you address potential implications of the results. So once we get an answer to this question, it will influence what people do about this. So if I find there is an effect, people should do this. However, if I find there's not an effect, then people should do this. Right? And it could be applied implications. It could also be kind of basic science implications. So if I find there's an effect in this, then that means that the next question is this, or then there's more support for this theory than this theory. Right? All things that you could potentially address in the discussion section. Okay, so that's a brief, rather quick overview, and again, I will address each of these sections in separate videos as we're getting closer to working on them throughout the semester. That's all for now. Take care.